Thank you so much for joining us this evening for Sex is Medicine, your #1 resource for holistic sex education. I am your hostess with the mostest, Miss Devi Erickson, and I'm joined this evening by my illustrious husband, Dr. Christopher David Erickson, and we are going to share with you this evening the ins and outs of our tantric relationship. So there are a lot of different styles of tantra being practiced here in the West, and there are a lot of different orientations and a lot of different ways in which folks express their tantra. And so I wanted to share with you our lived experience of tantra and the particular lineage of practice that we adhere to, and what that looks like, the ins and outs and day-to-day goings on of what it is to live and be a part of a tantric relationship. So first of all, why don't I introduce my husband? So Dr. Christopher Erickson, and Christopher and I met almost exactly 7 years ago last month. And we met at a friend's birthday party, and we were both in different relationships with different people at the time and developed a friendship. And then over time, as those other relationships dissolved, we became friends, even more wonderful friends and lovers, and eventually husband and wife. So that is a little bit about our story of how we came together. And anything else you want to add to that?
No, best decision I ever made.
Hear, hear. Awesome. So without further ado, we're going to dive into our talking points for this evening. So what makes a relationship tantra? What does sexual tantra practice involve? What does non-sexual tantra practice involve? And just going to give you an overview of what it looks like for those of us who adhere to lineage-based tantra, what it looks like for us to live that every day. So both Christopher and I have taken refuge in the Shangpa Kagyu lineage of Tibetan Tantric Buddhism. The head of the Shangpa Kagyu lineage is a wonderful being named Kala Rinpoche, and his predecessor, previous Kala Rinpoche, because they reincarnate over and over again to keep the lineage strong and healthy. His previous incarnation, also named Kala Rinpoche, I can't remember the other names associated with that, was the teacher for our Lama, Lama Tashi Dundrup. So our teacher, Lama Tashi Dundrup, lives in Kauai. He practices out of the Kauai Dharma Center. He hosts Dharma classes every Thursday evening. In fact, there's one tonight after the radio show if you want to check it out, kauaidharma.org. And I was introduced to Tibetan Tantric Buddhism through my mentor, who was one of Lama Tashi's students, and then I was introduced to Lama Tashi himself and began practicing non-sexual Tibetan Buddhist Tantra under the guidance of Lama Tashi, and the sexual Tibetan Buddhist Tantra under the guidance of my mentor. And so that's a little bit about my history. And Chris was introduced to Tantra via me, and
yes.
then...
well, my background is in philosophy and, sort of the Western approach to thinking about the world. And, I've sort of always been spiritually curious. I remember as a child, I was like 5 years old asking myself, what's the nature of God? And I sort of never really let that question go. And it informs sort of my own research. What's the nature of awareness, of consciousness? How does that translate into societies? That's sort of the stuff that I like to look at. And when I found this, it was like literally like somebody rang a bell in my head, and it just resonated so beautifully. And I was absolutely intrigued. And the more I look into it and the more I practice it, the more it unfolds and the more complex and interesting it gets and the more potent it gets and the more fun it gets. So yeah, I'm pretty delighted to be on this journey. That's for sure.
So the first thing I think to conceive of in regards to Tantra is a spiritual practice. It is a spiritual path and it is a spiritual practice. So our Tantra is not a hobby. It's not an orgy. It's not something we do on the weekends. Our Tantra is our way of communing with Some people call it God, some people call it the universe, some people call it our ultimate nature. So it's a way of cultivating connection and awareness and stability in understanding the true nature of who and what we really are. So we are so much more than our physical bodies. We're so much more than our thought patterns. We are literally God. My Lama wouldn't be happy with me using the word God, but it's the one that comes most naturally to my tongue. So Tantra, depending on the lineage of practice, can be philosophy, it can be scripture, it can be texts. The way we understand Tantra is it's a set of yogic practices. It's a discipline. And the purpose of these practices is to clear and release and heal any and everything that prevents us from experiencing peace and joy and bliss and connection and clarity and emotional stability. Mm-hmm. All of those qualities are our birthright. That is what we are entitled to as human beings. We are all entitled to peace and connection. We are entitled to live in a state of bliss, anchored, embodied, enriched, bliss.
To give and receive love effortlessly.
It is our birthright to experience joy. It's our birthright to experience clarity and awareness. So all of these qualities, which are expressed through the form and through our sensory experience, this is what we've come into this world entitled to experience. And we don't experience a lot of these qualities as a result of traumas and negative adverse childhood experiences, which is a topic of conversation many people are having these days. And all of these, and conditioning, cultural conditioning, and all of these experiences create obstacles or blocks or obscurations to the radiance of who and what we truly are. So as I've shared with many of you in the past, I come from a lifetime of deep pain and deep dysfunction as a result of somewhat overwhelming trauma. And trauma impairs our cognitive abilities, it impairs our wellness, and it impairs our sense of self deeply. And so for me, I started my spiritual journey at a very young age as a strategy to help me learn how to live in my body free of mental and emotional pain. And that eventually led me to the path of Tantra. And so again, Tantra is the way we practice Tantra in this lineage, it is a discipline. It is a yogic path. It is a set of methods and tools designed to help us experience all those wonderful qualities that we mentioned before. And so what does that look like in regards to relationship? Well, luckily, I'm in relationship with a partner who shares my spiritual view. We couldn't have the kind of relationship that we have if we weren't on the same path, because it is a path of healing and realization, spiritual realization and personal growth. We're constantly walking this path together. There's a terminology, I can't remember, you're yoked together, is that the? Yeah, there's a terminology like you're yoked together. So we are walking this path together. We are utilizing the same methods to cultivate awareness of self, to clear obscurations and obstacles so that we can have more free flow and more connection between ourselves and between all of the people that we encounter. So what that looks like day to day is doing our non-sexual Tantra yoga practice. Mm-hmm. So that means we meditate daily, and we meditate individually, and we meditate together. So Chris you have your meditations that he likes to do is Tibetan Buddhist meditations. I have my Tibetan Buddhist meditations. We start our day offering incense to the lineage holders, taking refuge, offering prostrations, cultivating mindfulness and presence before we move out into our everyday life, doing our deity yoga practices. So it really is a spiritual path that we're on together.
Mm-hmm. It's really useful in conducting these practices in the morning. It's really useful to kind of settle into being calm and quiet before the day begins, because the day is always full of stuff, as everybody knows. But if you begin with centering in that calmness, that quiet, that peacefulness, then you can carry it through the day very easily. And so all of the drama that happens during the day, you kind of see it, you go, oh, there's some drama, and that's it. It's not like, oh no, it's coming to get me. It's wrecked my day. It's like, oh, okay, there's drama. I don't need to pay attention to that, but there it is. And you continue on. And that's been a huge shift. Like for me, without doing these things, I would get caught up in the most minute things that would be, oh, my day is ruined. Oh no, that person took my parking place, whatever, whatever it is. And it would just throw me for a tizzy all day. And now it's just like, okay, here's what's coming up. Let's work with that. And it takes a lot of load off your shoulders. That's for sure.
And so, yeah, so what you're describing is cultivating that inner balance, that emotional equanimity, that stability. And so it starts with us individually, right? We can't have a stable, juicy relationship if we're all in turmoil. Yes. Inside our own minds, right?
Without a doubt.
So even though we are walking this path together, we're doing our homework. Right? I'm doing my self-awareness cultivation. Christopher's doing his self-awareness cultivation. And then when we come together, we deepen and enhance that experience with each other. So that is what our day-to-day Tantra practice looks like. Some people would probably think it's pretty boring. Or if you really are not interested in cultivating spiritual awareness, you're not going to enjoy this particular style of Tantra.
It's certainly not for everybody. And the process is, it's in the Western world, we like to look for the quick fix. And this is as quick a fix as you're going to find, but it is not a quick fix. There is a lot of work that goes along with this, because in this process of clearing out, in the process of getting rid of the obscurations that have blocked you from joy, there's some deep stuff there, and it can be really painful to look at that. And a lot of times when you're caught up in the drama, you don't want to go to those places that are a little more tender or a little more outright painful. Not physically, but so maybe even sometimes physically, but emotionally, spiritually, like intellectually, like all of it. We don't really want to face our traumas. And on this path, that's partly what you were doing. Now you're doing it slowly, gently, by comparison. But it is still a path. It's a journey, and we've all got a long way to go. So being on the path and clearing out doesn't mean that I've done this for a week, I'm good now. Not quite, but I can say that since, and I've been practicing this for about 6 years, I guess. And in that time, there have been tectonic changes in how I live. In how I see myself, in how I interact with others. Not perfect yet. Maybe I'll get there.
That's Buddhahood. Perfection is Buddhahood.
That would be awesome.
And certainly not our ideal of perfection, because our human mind is that big, and then there's the whole great universe and what it has in store for us. So notice that we didn't say anything about sex. So there is a belief, a rumor in the world that Tantra is about sex, and aspects of Tantra are about sex. And the way I think of it is we apply our Tantra to sex. So it's not whether or not Tantra is or isn't about sex. That's not the conversation even. For me, it's about applying the methods and the tools and the realization and the awareness and the freedom and the joy, applying all of that to the sexual experience. Mm-hmm. And so in order to do that, Christopher and I, schedule time to actually practice Tantra. Yes. So we have our regular sex, which is fun and amazing and enhanced by everything that we do in our formal sexual yoga practice, but then we also have a formal Tantra sexual yoga practice. Mm-hmm. And this is where we weave in or bring in the tools and techniques and the methods of this particular tradition that are sanctioned or earmarked for use during sexual yoga. Yeah. So a lot of the practices of Tibetan Tantric Buddhism, if you are a practitioner and you practice what's called deity yoga, some of those deity yoga practices are and can be applied to sexuality. It's appropriate to apply them to sexuality at a certain point in your realization and your practice. So for instance, I was introduced to Tantra as a part of a sexual yoga practice, and I was introduced to the Tibetan 5-element sexual tantric practices. And so in order to practice them sexually, I first had to learn how to do them non-sexually. Mm-hmm. And after a period of time and a level of accomplishment of applying them non-sexually, then I could start to weave them into both my solo sexual cultivation practices and partner sexual practices. And then as I advanced in my yoga with the 5 elements, and as I advanced in my deity yoga practice outside of the sexual experience, I was then given permission based on my accomplishment to then begin doing some of the higher Tantra sexual yoga practices, which weave in or include the deity yoga practices. But you have to build up to that. It's a graduation. And part of that is preparing your energy body and your energy channels to handle the intense increase in the amount of energy that you're running. You're literally, these yogic practices are literally harnessing your sexual energy, that potent, amazing, like powerful, overwhelming at times force of nature that lives in your genitals, that is there between your thighs, harnessing that energy and then using it to clear blockages, using it to enrich, using it as a path of transcendence to higher states of awareness and altered states of consciousness. And so there is a process to this. There is a method, there is a strategy, a formula. There's a formula for this. And so that is all part of the accomplishment in the realm of traditional or authentic, what we call authentic Tantra, is you're building layer by layer based upon your accomplishment. Every time you practice your non-sexual Tantra, it makes your ability to handle adding the sexual element more secure, more stable, and more robust. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. The way that I look at it, a lot of people think that Tantra is just about sex. And the way that I look at it is that Tantra is about sex in exactly the same way that medicine is about surgery. So it's like, is medicine? Yeah, it's about surgery. But if you walk into the doctor's office and say, I don't feel so good, and he whips out all those knives and says, I'm going to start cutting until you feel better. No, there's way more to it. Tantra is about sex, but it's also about making breakfast. It's also about cleaning your house. It's also about brushing your teeth. I mean, it's all of it. It's all of it. It literally is the weaving of everything into this process of spiritual awakening. I think that's perhaps the best way to do it. And as Devi was saying, you don't necessarily start off with the sexual stuff. If I'm teaching a kid how to drive, I'm not going to put him in a Lamborghini. There's just too much power, too much potency. He's going to wrap himself around a tree, right? I gotta like, okay, here's where the gas pedal is, and here's what a steering wheel does, right? I got to start there. As a matter of fact, I might give him a book first. Read this. But it's this process, slowly, and it builds upon itself. And at first, you're like, why am I doing this? I'm always reminded of that ridiculous movie from the 80s, The Karate Kid, right? Wax on, wax off. Why am I polishing these stupid cars? And you figure out, oh, wait a minute, there's way more to this than I thought there was. So like with the elemental meditations, when I first did them, I'm like, it's a shape and a color. And a sound. Why am I doing this? And as I've gone on further, I understand what's really there and how truly powerful that stuff really is. Even the beginning stuff, even the earliest stuff, you can keep coming back to it. And every time you do, it gets more potent, and you can move on to stronger, more complex practices, and then go back to the simple ones and go, wow, it's all right here.
Well, I love what you said about Tantra is about making breakfast or whatever we do, because really what Tantra is about is cultivating presence. It's about cultivating awareness, and like not our little ego awareness, our God awareness, our Lama always says, like, our true nature, natural mind. That's what it's about. That's what it's about. It's about cultivating natural mind and then weaving that, bringing that into every activity, whether it's making love or doing the dishes or having a poop. It really is being able to live, exist in a state of grounded, embodied bliss. Knowing, or not just knowing intellectually, but experiencing viscerally and somatically, feeling the connection, the interconnectedness of all life, and our connection to our true nature, our natural mind, and our connection to each other. So that is what Tantra is about. And as I was saying about the sexuality, so there are specific tantric sexual yoga methods that you can learn, some of which we teach in our courses. And a lot, as I said, maybe not a lot, but I will say I can think of 3 or 4 off the top of my head, Deity yoga practices that it is appropriate to use during sexual union. Like they're designed to be practiced during sexual union. And you kind of get a hint when you look at some of the Tibetan Buddhist tankas and you see them fucking. You see them having sex, and it's not just symbolic. It's not like, oh, it's a symbol. No, it's a symbol of people cultivating bliss for the purpose of realization.
Yeah, it is both literal and not. It's both literal and more metaphoric. For a lot of people, like, no, that's just symbolic. No, it's actually both. It's not one or the other. It is symbolic. It is literal. It is metaphorical. It's all of the above. That's, again, one of the beauties of these things is you begin to chip away at this either or way of looking at the world.
Yeah,
like
non-duality.
Exactly. For me, I'm trained in the Western academia. And so everything is here. And it's been really hard at times to bring it down into my body, like to be present in my body. And my own traumas in this lifetime exacerbated that. I spent, as a 9-month-old baby, I got 3rd-degree burns over 20% of my body. And I had to learn as an infant, I couldn't be safe in my body because it hurt too much. I had to pop out and fly around. And I spent a lot of the rest of my life doing exactly that. Not being present here and just kind of floating around into the ether, right? And bringing that back down, saying, what can I gather from out there that can help me and I can use right here? And that's been the trick. That's been the trick for me.
And so, as you may have discovered from hearing us have this conversation, there are in North America and the West in general, there are a lot of different orientations and approaches to Tantra. Neo-Tantra, like I've seen workshops being Neo-Tantra where people are like making dolphin sounds, and that's the way they practice their Tantra, right? There's many different orientations when we bring it to the Western world. And so I just really like to clarify that we are trained in Tibetan Buddhist Tantra in the Vajrayana tradition, and that is the foundation from which we practice, and that is the foundation from which we teach as well. So not everything that we teach is Tibetan Buddhist, because we're Westerners, and I've woven in methods that apply and can help us heal from a Western perspective. We bring in trauma-informed orientation to our Tantra yoga practice. And the spiritual yogic foundation of our practice is rooted in this Tibetan Buddhist Tantra tradition. And it's something that we cultivate every single day. Because regardless of whether we're teaching or we have a business, it's actually irrelevant. This is about our relationship to God. And that is what we are cultivating every day, individually and as a couple. And every time we come together, we are cultivating our union, and our union with each other, and our union with our ultimate nature. So that's our Tantra thing. So let's answer some of the interesting questions that people ask you about Tantra, because there's lots of misconceptions. So I love it when my students ask me this. So I have the great and good fortune to be able to share the Tibetan 5-element teachings with people all over the world. I have amazing, incredible human beings that I have the honor and privilege of teaching all over the world. And one of the fun questions that I get from some of my students is, do you and your husband have sex with other people? Because there is a tendency, I would say, in many Neo-Tantra communities to want to fuck lots of people. And I think that's great. And I certainly went through a phase in my Tantra journey, pre-marriage, where I had several partners, and was having my needs for sexual connection met in a variety of ways, and that is all wonderful. And it's important to distinguish that Tantra yoga, true Tantra yoga, does not require you to fuck a bunch of different people. It does not even require you to have sex with anybody else. You could just have sex with yourself. If you want to practice sexual Tantra yoga, you can practice sexual Tantra yoga alone. And in fact, that was like my main go-to for many, many years. It was just me and my vagina, and we had a good time. And you can practice your Tantra if you choose to enter into the Tantric path and you choose to enter into a Tantric relationship. You and your partner can practice however you want to. Christopher and I made a conscious choice that we are being monogamous now, because our monogamy enhances our Tantra practice. Absolutely. And enhances our connection. It, you know, we have enough intimacy triggers. We're actually working through some of our attachment traumas, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But for us, we made a conscious choice that we wanted to respect the boundaries of our relationship, and we wanted to have it monogamous for now. And that may change in 10 years. In 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, who knows? We may decide that we want to open the relationship up. But being a tantrika is not the same as being polyamorous.
Yeah, exactly. Polyamory and tantra, they're not the same thing. They may or may not be compatible. It makes sense to me that you could be tantric and polyamorous or not. And that's totally fine. You could be polyamorous without being tantric. Okay, lots of people are, great. But really, in my approach to this, Tantra is about, particularly with a partner, not only are you connecting with yourself, but now you're connecting with another person. And that can be challenging. It's not just a collision of bodies. It's a merging of being. And to do that with a single person, when you really reach down into the depths of that, is profound and challenging, and it can be immensely rewarding. And again, it can be difficult. And so to do that with more than that, it's like you've got to be good at the one first, I would think, because it's I don't know.
Or some people. I mean, that's just the way it flows for you and I.
That's the way it flows for me. So, but your experience, your mileage may vary, as they say, right? For different people, it works different ways. And the important thing is in that process to be in tune with how you are doing. How is your practice resonating with your action? If it's in line, okay, right? And if it's not, do something else.
Yeah, what comes to mind is our Lama Tashi said in regards to Tantra and, you know, us being able to teach it out in the world and running into other folks who also teach and practice Tantra. Our Lama says, if you know, when you encounter someone who practices Tantra, ask who is their teacher and what is their lineage. If they have no teacher and they have no lineage, they're not practicing Tantra, according to our Tibetan Buddhist Lama. And so for me, you know, in regards to like how we should do relationship, or if you're wondering like, oh, what's the best way for us, you know, me to do my relationship, we follow the guidance of our Lama. So if there's ever a question about how we should be most effectively using our Tantra, we would ask our Lama. In regards to relationship, we would ask our Lama.
Like,
and he may not,
appropriate?
Is this appropriate? And he may not have an opinion. I don't know. Lama Toshi, if you're there, he may or may not have an opinion. But for me, I would, because I have a teacher and I have a lineage, and my Tantra is my spiritual path. And so I want to be mindful of what is appropriate and what is in alignment. And it may be in alignment for us to have 10 different other partners or not. Right? But again, our motivation, our approach to Tantra is as a spiritual practice. And so everything that we do is with that orientation and with that focus. What is going to add to, enhance, what is right action based on that, and what may detract or pull away or impair our growth and our realization. So we don't want to do anything that will impair that growth and realization. And so for us right now, the relationship structure that we have fuels and feeds our path, fuels and feeds our practice. And when that changes, or if that changes, we'll address it at that point. Yeah. Cool. So that's your answer. So do you have sex with lots of other people? Maybe, if you want to, if it supports your growth and your realization. Right now we don't. That could change. Okay, another question. Does Tantra include kink? That's a fun question. So we were talking about this earlier.
That depends on how you define kink. Some people think having sex with the lights on is kinky. And other people, it's more involved. Mm-hmm. I am probably the most vanilla person in the world. I am not drawn to that at all. And so it's not something that I really incorporate or that we necessarily incorporate. But then again, some of what we do might by other standards be considered, oh, I don't know about that, because different people view things differently. But no, there's no requirement for it. It's not like, here's your Tantra uniform with the leather and the chains. No. That's not required at all.
And there's also no aversion. So here's the thing. If we go back to the core of what Tantra is about, it's about cultivating awareness, right? It's about clearing pathways and clearing obscurations to your true nature. That your true nature can be expressed in a myriad of ways. Yes. And so for you, your Tantra may look like kink, quote unquote kink. Absolutely. Your Tantra may include leather and studs and whatever is traditionally defined as kink. It may look like bondage. It can look like anything. There is not a rule. The core of it is your clarity, your awareness, your realization, and how that wants to move through you into the world. And it's going to be unique for you. It's going to be true and accurate for you. And it can look anyway. And Tantra inherently does not have aversion to anything. In fact, it's quite the opposite. There's a saying in Tantric Buddhism, the obstacle is the path. Yes. And bring everything onto the path. And in fact, if we have aversion to something, it's usually an indication that there is some healing that's necessary there. Absolutely. So when I find myself having pain or aversion or something, that is a sign to me to go inside and examine the core and the root of that wound. What is stimulating that pain for me? And examine that and apply medicine to that.
Yeah.
Right?
Like if you define kink as a pushing of the boundaries, then sure. As Devi was talking about, and I'm experiencing something very similar, the boundaries that I'm pushing are internal. Yeah. They are, what are those wounds? Why do I react so strongly to that? Why does this thing make me upset? Why is that such a pet peeve? What's behind that? Why is this pattern showing up again and again? And it's not comfortable to look at those things, but I'm willing to, without judgment, push that envelope a little bit and learn more. And from there, I can use, as you go through this process, you begin to develop more ability to be non-judgmental about things. And you develop something called discerning awareness, which is to tell the difference between what's appropriate and not appropriate.
And I want to pause you there, right? Because the appropriate, not appropriate. So this is another wonderful thing that our Lama says. It's not about good or bad or right or wrong. It's appropriate or not appropriate, right? So it's not, there's no judgment. There's no duality. It's like, is this action, is this experience appropriate for my realization, for my growth? Is it going to add or is it going to diminish? That's how we evaluate anything we do. Does it add to or does it diminish? Appropriate or not? It's as simple as that. So it really doesn't matter what the fuck you do, as long as it's in alignment with your ultimate motivation.
Yeah. We think about this in terms of like diet all the time. What's appropriate for like a peanut butter and jam sandwich? Great. It's appropriate for me if I'm hungry. But if you got a peanut allergy, no way. So how do I write a rule about, is a peanut butter sandwich good or bad? Ultimately, I can't. Because it is and it isn't simultaneously. It depends on the circumstances. And so we get that with food and things like that. Well, let's bring that same kind of thinking into spiritual growth and awareness. What is appropriate for one person may not be appropriate for another person. The practices that Devi and I do together are not appropriate for people that are just starting on this stuff. I jumped the line at one point and I put myself in the hospital. Yeah, longer story. But you have to, it depends on where you are, how far along the path you are.
And what path you're even on.
What path you're on. Yeah, exactly. Where are you going? How are you getting there? I mean, these are all questions to be constantly asking yourself.
And so, short answer, does Tantra include kink? If you wanted to.
If it's appropriate.
If that's the way you want to play your Tantra, it absolutely can. Absolutely. Again, it's bringing everything onto the path. But first, you have to have a path to bring everything onto.
Yeah.
So that's the key, and that's the goal. And that's what you're practicing and cultivating with your own Tantra yoga practice, is you're cultivating your path, your clarity, your joy, your openness, your connection, all of that here, so that no matter what you do, it's infusing, it's weaving, it's translating into every action in every moment, every activity. There's no separation. Right? Yeah. Cool. Okay. So moving right along, how do we deal with triggers? And that's like a big question. Like, triggers walking down the street is a different thing than triggers in relationships. So that's the wonderful thing about relationships, particularly a tantric relationship, is this is my mirror right here. He's a pretty mirror. He's a very lovely mirror. And we're constantly, I won't say constantly, it's not constant.
Almost constantly.
Almost, because we're not constantly reflecting our wounding. No, that's not.
No, we're constantly reflecting each other, and more. We started with reflecting wounding, and often we are now reflecting healing and growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And so triggers are when we're reflecting our own wounding to each other, right? So how do we deal with those? Well, you know, for me, I had to really educate myself about the impact of trauma. And understand attachment trauma and relational trauma and developmental trauma and how it functions, not just in our nervous system, but how it changes our brain, quite frankly, and how it impairs our ability to connect with ourselves and connect in a healthy way with other humans. And so in our relationship, because our relationship is the foundation of it is this growth, is this you know, commitment to individual and communal growth, and is a tool for growth. That's the way we use our triggers, as tools for growth. And it takes a tremendous amount of maturity. And one of the things that I remember experiencing very early on, so I had what they call a serial monogamist pattern. So I'd be in relationships up to a certain point, and the relationship would end, and then I'd be on to the next, and the relationship would end, and it was pretty predictable pattern. And I wanted something different, but it wasn't available to me at the time. And so I hadn't had the experience of being in a relationship for several years with somebody that I really wanted to be in relationship with. Most of my long-term relationships were with people that, I'm not going to talk bad about them, lovely human beings that they were, but it wasn't a correct match, right? And so it was very easy to make the issues about the other person, because from the beginning, the issue was the other person. But being in relationship with Christopher, it was a whole body fucking hell yes to be in relationship. It was never, oh, I like you, but there was no but in there. Being in relationship together for getting past my glass ceiling, of like 6 months to a year, and being in relationship for several years, I got to see that tendency inside of me to make my issues about the other person instead of about me. Right? Because before, as I said, it was the other person. It was the other person from the beginning. But now I saw the same internal dialogue, the same yuck, the same criticism arising, but in the context of a relationship that I really wanted to be in. So it didn't really make sense. So I had to say, this isn't about him. It's not about you being different. It's not about you doing something wrong. It's about me and my own resistance to or avoidance for intimacy. It's about me and my hitting my boundaries of connection, my blocks to connection. It's about me finding an excuse to not love you because I'm afraid of intimacy. And that was huge. And that was that happened, several years ago. I can't remember off the top of my head, but that was a big turning point in our relationship, where I understood that some of the issues that we were running into had to do with my own attachment trauma, had to do with my own fear of intimacy. And I was trying to make it about him when actually it was an opportunity for me to open and heal.
And interestingly enough, I came to the relationship with almost the exact opposite pattern. I was very used to giving myself up to be loved, giving myself up in order to be accepted. So putting everybody else first, but not me. And so as this pattern, like as some of it came to the forefront, and as I started to play out, there were times when she would accuse me of stuff that I knew I didn't do. And it gave me pause to say, oh wait, I don't have to own that, right? I don't have to own that. And so as she was in that process of healing, I'm doing exactly the same kind of healing from the opposite direction. And we are simply moving closer and closer together all the time. And as you move closer together, you actually move deeper as well, like a lot deeper. And so we are now able to access things that had been hidden from ourselves. And they now are just on the surface and open. And there's, I finally have an experience of what might be called secure attachment. And where I can make a mistake and it's not catastrophic, or I can be criticized for something and it doesn't mean that she's out. Or, I mean, none of that doesn't have to happen anymore. I can do something that I choose to do, and it doesn't mean that it's against somebody else. Right?
Yeah. And so you may, if you haven't, I'm going to invite you to just look up the different attachment styles. Many of our listeners are already, you guys are rock stars on that kind of stuff. But so I'm avoidant attachment style. So I'm like, I want an intimacy, but I'm afraid of it. I'm going to push it away. And Chris is anxious, desperately wants intimacy and craves it and yearns for it. And if I need alone time, it's a rejection. That's the way he would
That's
take
how
it.
I used to see it.
And so the beautiful thing is that having an awareness, like having some understanding of, different attachment styles. And it's very normal actually for avoidant and anxious to be in relationship because it's like, I want attention and I want to push away attention. That's freaking classic. So if you find yourself in that relationship, like that's so normal, and just know that like you are each other's medicine to heal. Like that's why you're together. And so having awareness of the attachment styles is one thing, but the way our Tantra practice has allowed us to use that knowledge skillfully is again weaving in the mindfulness. So cultivating that sacred pause, cultivating that ability to, instead of attach and latch onto something, to relax and let go. So that as triggers arise, instead of biting them and biting them and biting them and getting hooked and carried away, we cultivate the ability to let it go, to relax and to be mindful. And that doesn't mean that we're gaslighting or spiritual bypassing or anything. It just means that we don't have to dive into a fight, and we can examine, we can own our triggers. I'm feeling really, whatever, frustrated because I have a need for, and you're feeling really frustrated or disappointed or, insecure because you have a need for. And so we've been able to use the mindfulness, the presence, the awareness that we cultivate in our non-sexual and our sexual Tantra yoga practice, and then apply it to everyday difficulties that may arise, these triggers that may arise, and understand that it's triggering our wounding. That it's not about you being bad or me being bad. It's about we're rubbing up, we have a wound, and we're like rubbing on that wound. It's like having a splinter and you keep picking on it, right?
That's true.
And it's actually an invitation. It's an invitation for self-connection and it's an invitation for healing. And then it's been so amazing. Like I remember this one night when we were laying in bed, and I think we were having a difficulty about my avoidant and your needs for connection and my fear of intimacy. Yeah. And I remember we were just like we were sitting together and breathing and like feeling into this block inside of me. And the words that were coming is, if I move through this, I will die. Yeah. Like it was completely illogical. It made absolutely no sense whatsoever, but that was like the physical sensation in my body of, if I let go of this wall in my heart right now and open to you, I will die. And it was so phenomenal to experience that it had nothing to do with you, that at all. It had nothing to do with you. It was this internal, like, mindless terror of allowing intimacy at this particular point. And just by being able to be mindful and observe the block, it started to dissolve. Yeah. It was amazing. And from that, we've been able to experience continuously, like, ever deepening levels of intimacy. So the other question that we get often is, well, how do you bring the spark back? And well, you don't lose the spark because there's all this fucking amazing growth going on, right? Mm-hmm. Because instead of getting stuck at our blocks and stuck at our obstacles and stuck at our barriers, we are consciously every day removing them, dissolving them, weeding them out. And it happens naturally. It's not like this active thing, like, oh, I'm going to get rid of my blocks today. We just do our practice and shit happens. Like, it's like the lazy person's path to enlightenment. You just have to do your yoga and life gets better. It's freaking awesome. It's so easy.
It is pretty amazing. It is pretty amazing. You think you have to fight your way through it, and sometimes you just breathe.
Yeah, and
I mean, that's why with this question, how do you deal with triggers? Is that's it. That's where it starts, right? Just breathe, relax, and sit with it, observe it, and do your practice. And it for whatever reason, it just starts to dissolve.
And that's why our relationship keeps getting better. Because we are constantly dissolving and releasing anything that gets in the way of our love. Yeah, I mean, love is the foundation. I mean, if you come into a relationship and you're not in love, or maybe you're not meant to walk together, right? That's a whole different thing. But if you are in a relationship and you are in love, and you actually want to be together, things get stale and tired and boring because we stop growing, or we hit our blocks and we retreat instead of moving forward and through them into deeper union. And so Tantra allows us to, as I said, to dissolve and release those blocks so that we're constantly moving into deeper and deeper union. And the beautiful thing about union with God is it's infinite. It never ends. It is ever increasing. It is ever deepening. It's every day. It's a new fucking adventure. It's a new journey every single day. Yeah. So there is no, getting stale or getting boring or being distracted or whatever, because there's an aliveness that is always present, because we're consciously cultivating that vibrancy and that aliveness through our spiritual practice.
Yeah. It's like you become more and more keenly attuned to the mystery of your partner. Yeah. And it is a beautiful, it's a beautiful, wonderful, fabulous thing. In one of the practices, one of the preliminary practices is called Guru Yoga, and you picture your guru out in front of you, and you're so like, hey, thanks for all these teachings. And one of the things that's happening is that over time, almost anything can be seen as your guru, and in this case, it's like your partner is the one that brings the most appropriate lesson to you in the moment, right? Like that, and that just keeps happening constantly. And so every interaction, and this I would say is a really good example of what Tantra is, weaving everything together. Every interaction, when I'm in the proper headspace, every interaction with my wife is a guru yoga practice. Every one. Because I'm like, oh, thank you for these thank you for this stuff. Thank you for the lessons. Thank you for the blessings. Thank you for the kindness. Thank you for the openness. Thank you for the love. Right? And that just keeps getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And it's
ever increasing. Ever increasing.
Ever increasing.
Yeah. So we're running out of time, and I hope that we were able to answer some of your questions and share with you. We had a little bit of a rocky start. I was a little bit distracted by some feedback there. So pardon me if I wasn't as locked into you as I would love to be, but we did get there. And it is always a delight to share with you, our audience. And it was a delight to share with you some of the inside wonderfulness of my tantric union with my amazing partner, because so many of my wonderful listeners, you've been with me from the beginning. You were with me pre-Christopher, before Christopher, and so now you are here with me still, 3 years into our amazing tantric marriage. And so if you're interested in learning more about our particular style of Tantra, a couple things you can do. If you're interested in the sexual teachings, you can find us at authentictantra.com. We are the first and only government accredited school for tantric sexual healing on the planet. If you're interested in the traditional Tibetan Buddhist practice of non-sexual Tantra, we encourage you to reach out to our Lama, Lama Tashi Dundrup at kawaiidharma.org. You can send them a message to add them to your mailing list, and you can join them every Thursday evening at 8 p.m. Pacific on Zoom for a class in Tibetan Buddhist meditation class. So
highly recommended.
Highly recommend. In fact, that's what we're going to be doing tonight. So kawaiidharma.org, Lama Tashi, fabulous human being, and his wonderful consort Abby, and authentictantra.com if you want to learn the yoga of sexual tantra. So thank you for joining us once again. It's always a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you next month. The first Thursday of every month, we are broadcasting live. In between shows, you can stay connected with me at authentictantra.com. And if you're looking for a more personal connection with me online, you can follow me at Devi Word Tantra. I've really turned my social media into more of a personal expression as opposed to professional. So, much love, many hugs. Happy New Year!
Happy New Year,
We'll see you next month.